All right, welcome to NFL Outdated Cover 2 series. This episode is on the Baltimore Ravens, and I am joined by Nikhil Mehta, contributor for Heavy.com. How's it going?
It's going great. Thank you so much for having me, Andy.
I'm really excited for the Ravens. I'm not a Ravens fan, but I like all of the young players and specifically the quarterbacks that are this year. You see all these quarterbacks doing well, and I like that. I think that it's good for the league. You got all these different debates about MVP, and let's just get right into it. Lamar Jackson,
I,
give the case for MVP for him.
I think you have to start with the Ravens offense is built around this player. And I don't know that there's another quarterback in the NFL that the offense is so built around him, both the running and the passing game. So that's kind of the first step. But then you look at what he does week in, week out to just kind of will this team to victory amid all the injuries. We know the Ravens have been devastated by injuries all season, especially losing their top three running backs, Roddy Stanley, their all pro left tackle. It's been a rough season. And Lamar Jackson has risen to that challenge. Obviously, there are a lot of guys in this discussion, but for me, at the end of the season, if the Ravens are sitting with the 1 or 2 seed in the AFC, which they're not that far away from right now, Lamar has to be the MVP. I'm not sure that there's another case you can make. Right now, he is 83% of this team's offensive yards from one player, passing and rushing combined. That's incredible output. And you can look at the statistics and you can also look at the narrative. He's done things this year he hasn't done in the past. He's passing better downfield. He finally beat Patrick Mahomes. He finally had a large deficit comeback against the Colts, 19-point deficit, the biggest in his career. He's proving some of these narratives about him that have followed him throughout his career pretty wrong.
Yeah, and he has those big moments, and I don't know, as far as MVP case, if they do like the Heisman type moments like they do in college, but he's got those, and yeah, those comebacks and those big game wins. I mean, just in moments he has those. And what really kind of makes him as good as he is, or as great as he is, I should say.
So it's a couple things. I think one, it is the consistent growth in his career. He was not passing the ball this well his first year. I think he was a lot better passer than people gave him credit for, but the way he's passing the ball this season is so far and away better than he passed the ball entering this league. And it's just because you've seen him slowly add more and more and more to his game. 2018, he burst on the scene and no one knew what to do with the dual threat. We hadn't seen it since Vic, and he has since eclipsed Vic, it seems like, in that dual threat category. Then in 2019, he comes out and he's passing the ball, and no one has any idea what to do again. 2020, step back. Ronnie Stanley was injured. Definitely felt like some teams were daring him to pass, and he wasn't as good as he is this year. And this season, when teams have tried to just load up against the run and stop it at all costs, he has quite literally just thrown it over their heads. And that kind of progression is just remarkable. Remember, he's 24 years old. He's younger than Joe Burrow. That statistic, that fact is
Wow.
always insane to me that he is actually younger than Joe Burrow. But he's in his fourth year in the league. Joe Burrow's in his second. And that just tells you how much development Jackson has had in this league and that we really have no idea what his ceiling could be.
And leadership wise, like, I mean, you even see him in press conferences. He has it, doesn't he?
It's the professionalism. He's
Hmm.
gotten some headlines for being so respectful to reporters all the time, always referring to them as Mr. and Miss, just because that's how he was raised. And he brings
Hmm.
that sense of professionalism on the field. A 24-year-old quarterback to be this much the leader of a team filled with veterans on both sides of the ball, it's incredible. They recognize this talent, they recognize how much he means to the team, but he has seized that moment. He has seized that confidence from his teammates. And you see him on the sidelines. There was a great clip from, I believe it was the Colts game, when Justin Tucker went out and they won the coin toss in overtime. And the Ravens got the ball, and you could see the Lamar Jackson flash across the screen. If you're reading his lips, he said, "That's it, it's over," something along those lines. I can't remember exactly, but that's the kind of attitude he's bringing to this team. So the leadership's impressive from a 24-year-old. It's insane in this league.
And he's been able to kind of like stay in the pocket better, just kind of recognize those things better then.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the other thing is that People challenged him this offseason. There are people all been criticizing his passes, but there's legitimate criticism this offseason about, hey, you're deep passing, you're passing outside the numbers. You have to unlock those parts of your game. Otherwise, those are holes. And in the NFL, you just can't have holes in your game like that. He's answered that call, and he's been passing from the pocket really well this season. One of the things that he's done really well from the pocket is stepping up. It's a basic thing that he just struggled with early in his career. He would step up and take off right away, or he would just try and drift back and extend the play for too long. And neither of those are really what you want to see down in, down out from your quarterback. Ultimately, he stepped up in the pocket a lot better and just kept his eyes downfield.
Well, and speaking of that, it seems to be one of his favorite targets. Talk about what that connection with Mark Andrews means, and what makes Mark Andrews so good. Is it because of what Lamar Jackson can do, or part of it, what Mark Andrews does as well?
So it's a combination of things. I've heard a lot of comparisons to Travis Kelce from Mark Andrews this year. And it's interesting that comes up because something that Kelce said on Monday Night Football with the Mannings a while ago was about how he has the freedom to run routes as long as he doesn't conflict with other receivers and their routes.
Interesting.
So as far as I know, what I've seen this year from Andrews is that he seems to have similar freedom. I don't think he has quite the latitude that Kelce does, but he has a lot more latitude to alter the depth of route. He's been running a lot of option routes where he decides whether he's going to cut upfield or cut to the sidelines. And that chemistry with Jackson makes that kind of impromptu nature of Andrews' route running so effective because he trusts Lamar as seeing the game and seeing the field the same way he is. And when Andrews is thinking, oh, this is this kind of zone coverage, when he sees a cover 3 coverage, he knows where to attack. And he knows that Jackson knows where to attack and that they're on the same page about what kind of route he should run in response. That's one thing that's been really successful. Another thing is that Jackson has stepped up with the loss of Nick Boyle, which is the Ravens' really good run blocking tight end. Another thing that Andrews has done really well this year is run blocking. He is the best run blocking grade of any tight end from Pro Football Focus this season. And the only fullback that he is a worse run blocking grade than is Patrick Ricard, his teammate fullback for the Ravens. He's been awesome filling that role. And that's the other thing I think that has gone somewhat unnoticed. Even though he has the most yards per game of any tight end in the league right now, he is also filling a bunch of roles on this offense, important ones, and he's doing it really well.
Well, speaking of people having to fill roles, I mean, going with the running back situation, it doesn't felt so bad in the season with J.K. Dobbins going down, but and part of this may be the greatness of Lamar Jackson as well. I mean, you have all these running backs stepping in, and between Murray, Freeman, and Bell, I mean, talk about a little bit about how he's able to trust them coming in as new pieces, and then how everything's fitting that way.
Yeah, so one of the things with the Ravens running game is that mesh point at the read when you're doing these read options. There has to be good chemistry between the quarterback and the running back in order to make sure you don't fumble. And fumbles have been a huge issue for the Ravens in the past. So having a lot of new running backs is scary early in the season. And Murray has done a really good job. He is clearly the lead back once he gets back from his injury. I think he's an ankle injury right now. Once he gets back, he'll resume lead back duties, I expect, because he's been reliable. He's been the best at running between the tackles. He doesn't have the highest yards per carry of the 4 of them, but he's doing a good job hitting the holes. And with that, the yardage just continues to come. You just need guys that threaten the offense, that threaten the middle. And that gives Jackson a lot more room to work the edges, which is where his speed is most devastating. Then you talk about Devonta Freeman and Le'Veon Bell, 2 guys who just look like they have, in all honesty, lost a step. They're no longer hitting that 6th gear as quickly, if at all. There's been really good in the passing game, though. I think Freeman in particular has looked really good. And I think Bell, if he's used more in the passing game as a third down back, will excel more at this stage in his career. Tyson Williams is going to be the big X factor. Big preseason, a lot of hype for him after Dobbins and Gus Edwards got injured. People were expecting a lot from him, and he delivered 142 yards on, I think, 23 carries in the first 2 games. Good yards per carry, scored a long touchdown, and then ended up in the doghouse. It could have been a lack of effort thing. It could have been fumbles. We don't really know, but hopefully he's out of the doghouse before the end of the season because I think he is this team's best option at running back for the rest of the year. I think he provides a lot of power running up the middle, and he's got speed to stretch to the outside that Freeman and Bell just don't have. And so I'm hoping that he just gets another look and the team gives him another look the rest of the season.
Well, yeah, and would Murray just be kind of one of those backs eventually that would be counted on like along the goal line then?
Well, and that's the thing is Murray's been really effective in the red zone, and I'm not sure
Mhm.
really why because it's not something he has a reputation for in his career, but he's been really good in the red zone this season. So one thing is, I think a concern with all four of these backs is none of them have had a full season recently, a full season with a full workload as a running back. So you want to make sure you're splitting carries and not running anyone into the ground. I think Murray and Freeman will probably, or Murray and Williams should probably dominate carries from here on out. Freeman and Bell as change of pace guys, specific plays, third downs, especially in obvious passing downs. But I still think Williams still might not be in the coach's best graces. And so as a result, I still think Murray's going to be the kind of lead workhorse in the backfield from here on out.
Yeah. Going forward, then, what does that situation look like? I mean, you're going to have JK coming back, hopefully, healthy next year. What about the Gus Bus and maybe Tyson Williams? Those three then going into next
Yeah,
year.
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting. Murray could be the kind of veteran the Ravens want to hang on if he's not going to be too expensive. As a guy who just has good chemistry with Lamar, they trust in the system. Freeman and Bell, I'm not so sure. The Ravens will just need to see more of them, especially in the passing game, to even think about keeping them around next season. Williams, it also depends on how much they use him the rest of the year. If they lean on him and he does well, then I think he's got a great shot to hang on the roster next year. But if they give him another shot and he misses it, I just don't see him coming back from that, especially in Baltimore. Harbaugh has a tendency to occasionally just put guys in the doghouse. And sometimes if he lets them out and then they mess up right away, that's it. Fool me once, it's the old fool me once, fool me twice, right? So Dobbins and Gus are clearly going to be the lead backs next year. There's no doubt in my mind. The other guy is Justice Hill. He was rumored to be on the roster bubble after Williams had a really good preseason, but he's really good on special teams. He's good in pass protection. And importantly, he just knows this team and its offensive scheme really well. And so I still think Williams and Hill will be competing for a roster spot next year. But the J.K. Dobbins breakout season was supposed to be this year. I would just push that date back to next season, to be honest. And I think Gus Edwards is also going to come back really strong. He was one of the most underrated backs in the NFL, just seemed to always pick up 3 or 4 extra yards than you'd expect. Part of that obviously has to do with the Ravens rushing scheme and the threat of Lamar Jackson. But that's the big thing I was talking about with that quarterback running back chemistry. Dobbins and Edwards are so good at just hitting that mesh point right with Jackson and holding defenders in place as long as they can to give either the running back or the quarterback enough room and time to get to the outside.
Well, speaking of that, giving them time, for the wide receivers, talk a little bit about that group. I mean, you've got Hollywood Brown, Sammy Watkins, and Rashod Bateman. Talk about that group a little bit as well.
So, big focus of the Ravens this offseason was improving Lamar Jackson's targets. It's something that his 2019 MVP season, he had a rookie and still injured Hollywood Brown, Willie Snead, Miles Boykin, and not a whole lot else.
Mm-mm.
And and even last season, the wide receivers struggled because we just didn't have enough consistency at that position. What's crazy is Hollywood ended last season really well, and he's picked up that form this season and probably even taken it to a next level. I think he's a legit top 20, top 15 receiver in this league now. He
Really?
is
Yep.
he is just, I mean, the numbers back it up. You look at the variation that he can pull off with his routes. His route running has gotten noticeably a lot sharper, and as a result, he's getting more separation, not just to make it easier for him to catch the ball, but he's picking up more yards after the catch. Then you throw in his deep ball tracking, which has just been phenomenal. Lamar's been throwing in beauties all year. And yeah, he had a really rough game against Detroit, but he bounced right back from that the next week with that flying touchdown grab against Denver and has not looked back. So Hollywood absolutely living up to the name this year. Sammy Watkins was an ideal free agent signing. You look in hindsight, and the Ravens were rumored to potentially be in on Kenny Golladay, Allen Robinson, some pretty big names. And they ended up getting Watkins, and some fans were pretty disappointed. But I think that Watkins is the perfect guy. You look at what he did in Kansas City and helping unlock that offense. It's kind of similar in Baltimore now. You've got a speed, deep threat who's deadly after the catch in Hollywood Brown, and you've got a really reliable tight end who we've already compared to Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews. And so obviously a lot of differences in in some ways it's apples and oranges, especially with comparing Lamar and Mahomes. But it's interesting to see Watkins play that role in this offense, to be a guy that just seems to be open underneath and still flashing some deep threat, as we saw in week 1 as well.
And where does Rashod Bateman fit in, and then even Duvernay?
Yeah, and so the rest of the Ravens wide receiver core is really interesting. I'll start with Bateman and focus on him the most, probably. 7 catches in his career, all first downs. Pretty good start from him. He looked sharp in his first game. He looked even sharper in his second. And the chemistry and the trust with Jackson already seems to be there. So it's glad that they've been able. It's great to see that they've been able to hit the ground running. Right. That's something people were worried about when Bateman got injured. They were worried it would be another Rashad Perriman situation where he just never was able to get into the rotation. Bateman's return from injury came at kind of a fortuitous time. It was right after Sammy Watkins got injured, and he basically filled in that role. He did a great job running a lot of similar routes, had good chemistry with Jackson and RPOs. It was really encouraging to see, and I honestly think he might be this team's best route runner right now. Coming out of college, he is such a
Wow.
sharp route runner. The buzz coming out of camp and from the Ravens receiving coach and pass specialist, just that he is just so sharp with his routes in a way that you don't usually see from a rookie, especially one that had to sit out a bunch of games due to injury. So it's just exciting to think about Watkins, Hollywood, and Bateman and Andrews all on the field together for Lamar to throw to. And the Ravens haven't even had that yet, and they've already been pretty deadly through the air. And then you get to the rest of the guys, and they're kind of like role players filling out an NBA roster in a certain way. Devin Duvernay is a fantastic special teams returner, but he's done really well as a rotational receiver, and he's done really well as a speed threat on a lot of jet sweeps. And that has forced defenses to kind of respect the edge and the speed run game that the Ravens lost when Dobbins and Edwards went down. Duvernay's done a good job of forcing defenders to not just collapse on Jackson and respect the edge in the run game on some of these jet sweeps. He's also been a pretty reliable receiver, gets a lot of rotational downs, and fills a similar role to Watkins. James Proche is a guy who had a really good training camp, and you just haven't seen as much of him this year just because there are a lot of more talented guys ahead of him. But when he is on the field, he gets open and he's reliable, and you can see Lamar trusts him. Then behind him, you've got Miles Boykin, Tylan Wallace, who are mostly playing special teams right now. But I wouldn't count out Tylan Wallace being more important in future years after some of the guys that we have right now leave. Boykin, I just don't know what to do with him. He's a great run blocker, and he's a physical beast, but he just doesn't seem to have receiver talent. He just doesn't seem to have route running sharpness and consistency in order to be a full-time receiver. And so ultimately, I think there's a reason why he's played the fewest downs, I think maybe other than Wallace at receiver this season. But you look at all those names, Watkins is the oldest of those guys. They're all young. They're all everyone but Watkins is still on their rookie contract. They have so much time to develop and mesh with Jackson. I know some will leave in free agency. Some will probably find good deals elsewhere or probably earn more money or more snaps elsewhere. But if you think about Hollywood and Bateman as the future of this wide receiver core, and then any kind of mixture of Duvernay, Proche, Wallace, Boykin, filling other roles in this offense, it's really exciting for the Ravens' future.
Absolutely. And you talk about Tylan Wallace. Who would you compare him to? Like, is he kind of is he a taller back or taller receiver?
So he's kind of an interesting case because he played mostly on the
Well,
outside in
he's only
college.
5'11", it looks like. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he played on the outside a lot and showed a lot of ability at the catch point. Great
Mhm.
contested catch. I think led the NCAA in contested catches while he was in college. But he's not big enough or physical enough on the boundary to play outside receiver. And so ultimately, I think he's going to be best served by a move to the slot. It's where his quickness makes him a vertical threat and a short field threat. And I also think when you have a guy who can have contested catches from the slot, that gives you more flexibility in terms of what kind of routes you can run him. You can run him towards the sideline, which is not something that everyone loves to do with their slot receivers because you know that he has the strength at the catch point to make those kinds of catches. He's also just shown really good promise on special teams, which is nice to see out of a rookie who's not getting a lot of playing time on offense. Ravens have always been a strong special teams. And Wallace has talked about how, hey, I know I've got these guys in front of me on the depth chart. I'm a rookie. I was drafted in the 5th round. I get it. But I'm going to play my butt off on special teams because I want to continue to be a contributor on this team either way.
Absolutely. Well, in speaking of a group that's definitely been contributing, especially with how well the running game is, for the Ravens. How good is this offensive line? I mean, you said we've had injury, but talk about how good the offensive line is right now, and then maybe how good they can be.
Yeah, so something really interesting about the Ravens offensive line that surprised me, I didn't know. I read it earlier. They have the, I think, fourth or fifth best blocking grade overall from Pro Football Focus. Really impressive when they've rolled out three or four, I think, three different starting lineups this season. Ronnie Stanley came back for one game and was eviscerated against the Ravens, and Villanueva played really poorly at right tackle. But since Villanueva moved over to left tackle, his natural position, and Patrick McCarry, who used to be the center before bad snaps cost him his starting job, is now playing right tackle, an undersized right tackle who's held his own against the likes of Joey Bosa and Von Miller this year. He's been probably the most impressive guy in this line so far, and a big reason why they have been able to hold up. His chemistry with Jackson has been really good. We talked about Jackson stepping up in the pocket and trying to, extend plays, but not completely break out of the pocket. And his chemistry with McCarry has been really good. One of the things McCarry can't do is just powerfully overwhelm opposing pass rushers. He's just not big enough, not strong enough. But he's really good at using their leverage against them and taking them further downfield out of the play. And that opens up a lot of space for Jackson to step up and move to his right, where he can throw a little bit easier than it would be moving to his left. That kind of chemistry, underrated thing in the NFL, but I think it's been huge for the Ravens in terms of just staying afloat this season. Then you talk about Kevin Zeitler,
Mhm.
huge addition in free agency. Haven't had consistency at right guard since Marshall Yanda retired.
I'm an Iowa guy, so Marshall Yanda's my guy, and actually Kevin Zeitler is Wisconsin. I live in Wisconsin, and I know his father-in-law actually. So
Yeah, and love those big beefy right guards. I mean,
hmm
that's a seems like just a classic thing to have in Baltimore. He's been so good at locking down that side. Bozeman switching back to center. He started there at Alabama as a center. So I wasn't worried coming in that switching from left guard to center was going to mess him up. He's been one of the best pass blocking centers in the NFL this season. Left guard has been kind of an issue. Injury to Tyre Phillips in the first game. Ben Powers has played good, but not great. Ben Cleveland, I was hoping to see more of, our third round rookie, the massive guy that people have compared to the Mountain from Game of Thrones. Just an absolute behemoth of a human being. But he got injured too. I believe it was against the Colts. And so, hopefully he works back before the end of the season. But I think Ben Cleveland is still a left guard, a starting guard for this team in the future. I just think that now that they've had so much reshuffling on the line, once they get their core back in the second half of the season, they're not going to upset it by introducing Cleveland into the mix once he's healthy. So it's been an interesting season at O-line. I've been really impressed. I hope McCarry comes back quickly. Otherwise, right tackle is going to be tough. Right now, it's going to be Tyre Phillips, and Ben Powers is going to stay at left guard. Jawan James could come back in December, the guy who the Broncos cut after he tore his Achilles while working out away from team facilities.
yeah,
He could be a huge wild card, but he also didn't play last year. He opted out due to the pandemic. So I'm not really banking on him coming back and having an impact, mostly just being a break glass in case of emergency option if he gets healthy this season.
Well, you talk about all those pieces and shuffling in and out, and yet did they just tie the record a few weeks ago or something for
Yeah,
rushing?
they tied the record for, I think, 43 consecutive games with at least 100 yards. Of course, they couldn't break the record the next week. That was the game against the Colts, which required the crazy comeback and mostly passing to win that game. But yeah, the interesting thing about the running game is that it hasn't been as efficient. It's still been pretty effective, but it's not the crazy margin of efficiency compared to the rest of the league that it has been in the past. So you got to give credit to the offensive line for just keeping it together. At a certain point, when you expect to have a set offensive line of Ronnie Stanley, Tyre Phillips, Bradley Bozeman, Kevin Zeitler, and Alejandro Villanueva, and as of right now, only two of those guys are still playing the same position, you can't ask for more out of this offensive line at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of asking a little bit, more out of a side of the ball. I mean, can you ask much more out of the defensive side of the ball?
I can ask a lot more out of this defense. Tackling is a huge, huge thing. And at the end of the day, you got to tackle. It's the NFL. It's football. You have to wrap your men up, and it's something that has been spotty throughout the year. They've looked somewhat better. They looked a lot better against the Chargers and then a lot worse against the Bengals. You're hoping that they took some time to work on it during this bye week. So tackling is a big thing. Calais Campbell has been incredible this season. He blocked a field goal against the Colts and very nearly blocked the second one that Blankenship missed that let the game get to overtime.
Mm-hmm.
He has been a force on the interior. He looks 10 years younger. He's 35, and he's playing the most snaps of any defensive lineman on this team. It's incredible to see what he's doing, and I can't say enough about Campbell. I mean, he's just bullying opposing offensive linemen, blowing up plays at every opportunity. Marlon Humphrey has it's been a tough season. I think he had a Defensive Player of the Year campaign going last season.
Mm-hmm.
This year, missing Marcus Peters, big time, because he doesn't have someone who can you can each lock down your side of the field and take on whatever matchup is in front of you. That means Humphrey having to trail Jamar Chase all game. That's a tough matchup. And when you have to do that, when he's moving in motion, when he's lining up in the slot, he's lining up outside, that kind of thing is what Marlon's been asked to do all year. And he's mostly risen to the challenge. Obviously, against the Bengals, he didn't get the job done. He admitted it after the game, and I'd be surprised if we saw him get burned that badly again this season. But definitely missing Marcus Peters. Anthony Averett's been good, but not great at corner. He had that one game against the Colts where he couldn't cover anything. Other than that, he's looked bad occasionally because he gets thrown at so much. He gets targeted more than almost any other cornerback in the league because teams know they'd rather not throw at Humphrey still. And so that means targeting Averett. Before, you had to choose between Humphrey and Peters, and neither of that was what you wanted to do. Now it's easier to just go after the matchup on Averett. So that's where Marcus Peters is missing. I'm hoping that's where Chris Westry, their injured cornerback, physical, like Jimmy Smith style, physical, fast, really strong, good tackler, can come in and help out with some of the matchups. When Averett is overmatched on the boundary, for example, that's when Westry can kind of step in. You know, another thing is Chuck Clark and Deshaun Elliott, this pair of safeties, two of the smartest safeties that I've seen in recent years. Clark just seems to know what the offense is going to do. Every third play, he seems to know exactly what they're going to do. And it's pretty impressive to watch because he's not the most athletic guy. It's like a shortstop in baseball who has to be really good at positioning himself and knowing where the ball is going to be hit by specific batters in order to make plays. Clark's that kind of guy. He's not a physical freak. He doesn't have a crazy 40 time. He's plenty athletic and a lot of short area quickness, but he can't make up for any lapses in judgment with physicalness. And so what he does instead is he's just the smartest person on the field, maybe other than Calais Campbell. He is just all over the place. He knows what defenses are going to call. He studies offenses are going to call. He studies tendencies really well, and he does a great job leading that defense. So,
what about the linebacking core then? Would that be the weakness of this defense? You'd ask even more? Or?
So I guess the thing I ask from the defense is a little bit more from everyone. The linebacking core struggled early in the year. Patrick Queen did not look good. Malik Harrison did not look good. This is where losing LJ Fort in the preseason really hurts the Ravens, is not having a stable veteran linebacker to help. Now with news that Harrison suffered a gunshot wound in Cleveland this weekend, which is going to force him out, I think, for at least 3 games. They had to move him to the non-football injury reserve list, which crazy situation. Glad to hear that he's okay. And just truly awful to hear that about any player, but especially Harrison, because he has looked good in a smaller role this season when he's focused as a run stopper. Last few games, Patrick Queen and Josh Bynes have been the best inside linebacking duo in the NFL the last 2 games. They've been incredible against the run. They just seem to flow right where it's headed. That's come from a combination of Bynes' veteran know-how, and then you've got Patrick Queen, who is just able to focus in on a smaller set of responsibilities with Bynes next to him. So I'm actually confident in this middle linebacking core from here on out. Moving on to who I really want more out of, one would be Calais Campbell needs more help on the interior of the defensive line. Derek Wolfe is supposed to come back soon from injury, and I think that's going to do a lot, having another just really smart veteran player on that defensive line. It was supposed to be a breakout year from Justin Matabuke. So far, that hasn't come. Ravens fans are hoping that comes in the second half of the season, but the other disappointment has been Brandon Williams, the $50 million nose tackle that has been graded really poorly by PFF. I think they've been a little bit unfair to him because he does eat a lot of double teams. He does have some his job in the run game is to eat blocks, not to necessarily make stops. And so while I wish I would see him fighting off blocks and still making stops, which is what he's getting really paid to do, that $50 million contract, he's supposed to be going above and beyond to make plays. And I just haven't seen it from him. And he's just not a factor in the pass rush. And so that's been a tough point for the Ravens all season. And that's mostly been overshadowed by Campbell, just his individual brilliance in that area. But for the rest of the year, Campbell can't do it all. So interior D-line, the pass rush on the edge has been good, but not great. I think that the current trend in the NFL defenses actually seems to be cover two against good quarterbacks. And I think this was the mistake against Burrow. It's something that succeeded a lot against Herbert and against Mahomes, which was cover two, drop guys back in coverage and use creative stunts and use different, show different players on the defensive line and make it seem like guys are going to blitz and drop them into coverage and keep 7 guys in coverage and only rush 4. That's something the Ravens, I think, can get back to. I think they have the talent on the line and the defensive coordinator who can scheme a lot of pressure to do that.
We'll talk a little bit about that then, like coaching, obviously the evolution of John Harbaugh and then also the defensive coaching as well.
So Harbaugh to me is a master motivator. I think he might be the best motivator in the NFL. So I usually think they're two, and this is a generalization, but I think head coaches, for the most part, they are football geniuses, your Cliff Kingsburys, your Sean McVays, or they're master motivators. And that's not to say the motivators, aren't really smart about football, but I mean the reason why they're the head coach.
Mm-hmm.
Harbaugh is the kind where he is a master motivator. Really good at really great special teams coach, comes from that background, but he wasn't known as a really great offensive or defensive scheme guy coming in. He is just a pure leader. I make a habit of watching his locker room speeches for personal inspiration because he just knows exactly what levers to hit for his team. And it was a really impressive locker room speech. I believe it was after the Kansas City Chiefs game. I can't remember. It might have been a different game where I actually went through and broke down 3 or 4 different things he does, just specifically pointing out guys in the room, positional groups, handing out game balls. That just shows how well he knows each and every one of his players. And that is how they've persevered through these injuries. I think Harbaugh just has not gotten enough credit. I think he should be in the coach of the year conversation for getting through all of these injuries, and being 5-2 halfway through the season is incredible. And that's because he's kept this team focused. He's kept them on track, and he doesn't have them looking back and dwelling on losses and dwelling on mistakes. He has them looking forward. The other thing, and this is the evolution part of it, the Ravens and Harbaugh have embraced statistics, data, and analytics like more than maybe almost any other team in the NFL, to a lot of success. Going forward on 4th and 1 against the Chiefs, that was maybe one of the signature John Harbaugh plays, kind of similar to what happened in 2019 against the Seahawks, because he called to Lamar. He said, Lamar, do you want to go for this?
Yeah.
You love seeing that because
Mm-hmm.
Lamar wants to go for it. Mm-hmm. But Harbaugh is putting him in that leadership spotlight. And so this is kind of one of the reasons he's such a great leader, is because great leaders make other leaders. And the chemistry between him and Jackson is part of the reason why Jackson is such a leader on this team. And so everyone in the world knowing that you are asking your 24-year-old quarterback what he wants to do, not you are the coach and you're telling him what to do, that's huge. That makes a world of difference, both to the rest of the team and to Lamar himself in terms of confidence. But he also said that decision was fully backed by analytics and that they were pretty much going to go for that either way. He knew Lamar would say yes, but part of that is, let me get this team excited. Let me get Lamar excited and let him know he's in control. And that's kind of the amazing duality of John Harbaugh, is the ability to pair this very avant-garde, statistical-based approach to the game. 4th downs especially is something they've been great with, especially with Jackson. And this motivating, knowing your players aspect is just incredible.
Well, yeah, and we talked about, before we went on here, we talked a little bit about, how he's, started. He had Flacco, and just that transition of who Flacco was to now who Lamar is, and just be able to see that and go with that, and it's really been, I mean, to win a Super Bowl with Joe Flacco, and he's at least on the precipice of winning at least one, if not more, with Lamar, and just kind of that chemistry is huge, and that just, I mean, that moment, it seemed like kind of theatrics, so to speak, but when you look at it, what player doesn't want to play for a coach like that? Like, it didn't seem like he was asking because he didn't have confidence himself, but it was almost the opposite.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Right, he was confident in going for it because the statistics back it, and that confidence gives everyone else confidence. And that communication with Jackson is just so key. And him and Jackson's relationship, a lot of the Ravens Wired episodes have kind of focused on that, especially after the Seahawks game. They're just they're it looks like they're friends. I mean, this is a huge comparison, and it's neither of these guys is at that level yet. But hey, we're on a show. Let me throw a take out there.
Do it, yeah.
The way you see these guys, Harbaugh and Jackson, talking and communicating with each other and really understanding each other, it's what you see out of the great combos. And I don't think Belichick Brady. That's a completely different that's a completely different duo. But it's more Phil Jackson, Michael Jordan. That is the kind of relationship those two guys had. And I think Jackson is a much better leader of his team than Michael Jordan was. But I think the way that Harbaugh lets everyone know this young man, this 24-year-old QB, this is our team. And Harbaugh does not make it seem like it's anyone but Jackson's team ever. But in a way that he is our leader.
Yeah.
Not that he is the star, but he is our leader. And we do this with him. And so the way that Harbaugh halfway through the season in 2018 throws out his offensive playbook to install this read option, things that you'd never see Joe Flacco do, obviously. Mm-hmm. But that's also because he knew that you couldn't put Lamar Jackson in a place in this downfield passing offense and have him succeed because you're not maximizing what Lamar Jackson has to offer you. So just in terms of knowing your players and how to emotionally connect with them and how to use them on a football field, I don't know who's better at it than John Harbaugh.
Well, I'm a little bit older than you, and I thought you were going to go here, but it almost seems like a Walsh in Montana.
Mm-hmm. I think that's probably the perfect football comparison. It's better than the Jackson Jordan one for sure, because it's buying into the scheme, and it's more than it's kind of melding the spirit with the scheme in a way. That free flowing spirit that Jackson have, it's confident, but he's not too brash or arrogant about it. The Ravens game is very much like that. The ground game, especially, we're going to hit you in the mouth, and we're just going to see who wins. That is how the running game has been for years. Obviously, this year it's been a little bit different with a lot of the injuries and the running backs, but it fits with the attitude of this team and honestly this city.
Well, talk about another position on the field that really has, won so many games. Justin Tucker, where does he rank all time as a kicker? I mean, not just Ravens, but all time.
Yeah, if Justin Tucker retired today, he'd be the greatest kicker of all time. Wow. I think that's almost impossible to dispute because you can take out how cool he is. The guy sang opera. The guy does Royal Farms commercials here in Baltimore. It's great.
Wow.
But if you're talking about pure statistics, pure football, he's made 50 straight field goals in the fourth quarter overtime. Of those 50, 21 have been from 40 yards or more. 7 have been from 50 yards or more. And of course, 1 has been from 66. The longest kick in NFL history to win the game with time running out against the Lions this year. One of the most electric moments, in my opinion, of all time in Ravens history. Because Tucker is just that guy for our team. He is the GOAT. He's never missed a kick in the final minute of regulation, ever in his career. Wow. He's the most accurate kicker in NFL history of all kickers ever. I'm sure there's a minimum attempts. I'm sure guys who have hit 3 field goals this season don't count. But with a minimum of a certain number of attempts, I think 50, 20 attempts, whatever it is, he's the most accurate kicker. And he's hit the longest one. In terms of just what you define as greatest, I'm not sure what more he could do. He comes up in the clutch in the fourth quarter and overtime. He comes up consistently from all distances with his accuracy. He rarely misses an extra point. And he has the record for the longest kick of all time. To me, I don't know what else you'd have to put together. Like someone else would have to surpass one of those 2 records in order for him to be not the greatest anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you think of like Vinatieri, but because he had the Super Bowl kicks. I mean, that's the only thing that really kind of puts him there. I mean, he was good for quite a while, but he doesn't have the leg that Tucker has.
And I think that's the thing you look at when you talk about greatest kicker of all time. I just don't know how you put anyone else up there. There have been a lot of great guys, but I think Tucker's going to have opportunities to make kicks in the Super Bowl in his career. And that's the other thing, is that he's still got plenty of time. I think he's only 30 or 31, and kickers can kick for a long time. I think Tucker continues to play probably until he's 40, and I think it's going to be pretty tough to argue at the end of his career. He's going to own a lot of records, more than he has now. And if he gets a shot at a long kick in Denver at Mile High Stadium, if the conditions are right, I'm confident he can hit a 70-yarder.
Wow, that would be exciting.
That's in the thin air, so he gets a little boost from it.
But still,
but I saw him do it at warmups this season in Denver. He hit from 70. He didn't get the chance to in the game, but I think if he needed to, the adrenaline in that moment, he said this after the Lions game, the adrenaline in that moment, he took a little bit of an extra step back from his normal routine and gave himself every last bit of oomph, which he needed. But I think he'd be able to do it.
Well, talk about like opportunities for this season in the playoffs, Super Bowl. Where do you see this team going? I mean, do you see them getting to the Super Bowl?
Yeah, the AFC, you might as well take the American Football Conference, take the A out of it, and replace it with any given Sunday Football Conference.
Right.
It's been crazy. You have the Ravens destroying the Chargers one week, get destroyed by the Bengals the next week, and then the Jets beat the Bengals the week after. As a football fan, I love it. It's so fun to watch. Even walking out of that Bengals game, you got to see Burrow and Chase together in the NFL. It was special. And it's, even as a Ravens fan, it's easy to say that was special. Looking at the rest of the season, I do think the Ravens end up winning this division. The Steelers beating the Browns and all of this drama with Odell Beckham Jr., I'm just not sure how much the Browns can push through this. And I think it's clear the Steelers don't have the quarterback talent to hang in this division. That leaves us and the Bengals, and it's really going to be a measure of who can win all of their winnable games. The Ravens have games against the Packers and Rams left on their schedule, and those aren't winnable games by any stretch of the imagination, unless Aaron Rodgers happens to be out. That makes it a lot more winnable for Baltimore against the Packers. But that Rams game, we have to play Von Miller again this season, and this time he's next to Aaron Donald and with Jalen Ramsey at cornerback. So, but we have winnable games coming up too. The Vikings, the Dolphins, two coming out of the bye that should be winnable games to the Ravens, and the Bears after that. The division is going to come down to who drops fewer of the games that they should be winning. That's pretty much what it's come down to several years in a row now, other than 2019 when the Ravens ran away from it. Because the games, the intra-division games, are always dogfights. Whether it's the first place team versus the last place team in the division, you never know what's going to happen in those games. So I always don't count on winning division games to win the division. I always count on winning the games that we should be winning. The games in which our team, our talent level, our preparation is just outmatched against an opponent that's just outmatched. Games like the Bengals should have won against the Jets. And it's about making sure there is as few of those games the rest of the season as possible. If we do that, I think the Ravens should still win this division. I give them a good shot at a top 2 seed in the AFC just because it's been such a mess and every team has holes. Even the Bills have lost a couple times. And so I still think the Bills probably secure the number 1 seed. Part of that is they just have an easier record on the way out or for the rest of the season. But I think the Ravens still have a good shot at winning division and getting a 2 or 3 seed. And I also think this team is built to win in the playoffs. I think that against most opponents, obviously I'm not excited to face the Bengals again this season, but I think that it's really hard for us to lose to them several times in this season, or any team several times in this season. And so whether we face the Chiefs again, the Chargers, who knows who will play in the playoffs, but I do think that this team is capable of making the Super Bowl out of the AFC. The AFC is so beat up and so banged up that this any given Sunday style of a season that we've been having means, of course, the Ravens can get to the Super Bowl. I think the most likely outcome is getting to the AFC Championship game and losing, unfortunately, again to the Bills, just because that just seems like where the season is headed for me to some reason. It doesn't seem like it's going to be the Chargers or the Chiefs, but we don't play the Bills this season, which means the first time we get a chance to play them is in the playoffs, and who knows which team is going to be more ready for the other.
Ultimately, tell you what, yeah. Would it matter if if it's a home game or not?
So I'd like to think it does. And Baltimore fans, it gets loud. Quarterbacks have talked about it's tough going in to Baltimore. But to be honest, it's tough going playing a away playoff game anywhere in the league. So obviously love to have as many home games in Baltimore as I can. That's just a huge part in terms of making sure the crowd is quiet when the offense needs to be quiet and it's loud when the defense needs. I mean, the Colts game, this was really interesting in the Colts game when Lamar drove them down the field at the end of regulation and got that touchdown to, I believe it was Mark Andrews. And MVP chants burst out. The entire stadium was chanting MVP. And Lamar, walking back to the huddle from the sidelines after figuring out the 2-point play, was just doing this. Calm down, quiet down, because he needed quiet to deliver that 2-point strike to Mark Andrews that sent the game to overtime. That home field advantage can come into play in circumstances like that.
And I mean, thinking of like Buffalo in the wintertime, like would it matter, this team in the snow?
It's tough to say. It's funny because John Harbaugh was talking today about the Ravens Vikings game, the most recent one, which was in the snow. A lot of missed tackles, a lot of really long runs broken off because no one could, move quickly enough to make tackles. I think ultimately it affects both teams the same. I don't think there's any aspect of the Ravens game that is necessarily more affected. If anything, you could argue they have a better running game than the Bills and therefore should be at somewhat of an advantage in the snow if it's actively snowing and it's making it harder to pass the ball. But at the same time, I'm not too much of a believer that weather can cripple offenses and quarterbacks disproportionately. I know the Bills have more experience playing in the snow, but I also think you're still not ready for it and you still don't necessarily practice it a lot. So ideally, we don't have a game in the snow, but I'm not sure the Ravens' chances are worse than that much if it does happen.
Yeah, I mean, tell you what, like if the Ravens, get there and they get to the Super Bowl, there's really, I mean, you talk about the matchups, the Rams matchup. I mean, whatever team is there, it's going to be an exciting matchup just to see how Lamar does, and that Rams defense might be incredibly tough. You think of, I mean, what are some other teams that you would be worried about if the Ravens were to beat in the Super Bowl?
So here's the thing. I think if the Ravens make the Super Bowl this year, I just think by the time they make it out of the AFC, they're going to be so beaten and bruised and bloody. I'm not sure they're going to be able to stand up to what seems to just be a superior team group of teams in that conference this season. The Rams, the Bucks, the Cardinals. If Rodgers can figure out the coronavirus vaccine and not have that be an issue from here on out, the Packers. Those are four really good teams, and those are four really, really good teams. And the Cowboys. I don't know if I mentioned the Cowboys yet. Also looking incredible, and so they're tough matchups. All five of them. I think my dream matchup in terms of most fun Super Bowl is definitely Cardinals Ravens. I just think
Mhm.
that would be such an incredible show. You would see so many great players matching up against each other. I think that would be the dream. But I think any matchup against one of those NFC teams is just going to be tough for a depleted Baltimore team because those teams, one of the things is it seems like the injury bug has bitten the AFC a bit more aggressively than it has the NFC. And that's just dumb luck, right? But it does seem like those top teams in the NFC have lost fewer key contributors than the top teams in the AFC have. You look at the Titans, for example. Now they've lost Derrick Henry potentially for
Mhm.
the season. That's a potential MVP candidate right there.
Mhm.
And so you don't really see that happening in the NFC, maybe other than the Cowboys, who have suffered a lot of injuries, but no one uber critical like some of the top teams in the AFC have.
Absolutely. Well, looking at you don't want to look for next year yet, but what are some holes and like draft needs that you see for this team going in to 2022?
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite things actually with the Ravens every year because they seem to be really good at drafting. At
Mhm.
least when the picks come in, I'm really excited all the time. Obviously, not every pick's going to work out. They've had some duds in recent years, but draft night, they just seem to do really well. And so they have 10 picks right now in the 2022 draft. Nine of them are in the first four rounds.
Wow.
This is supposed to be a talent loaded draft because of so many players who opted out of the 2020 season. You couldn't get reliable scouting tape on them heading into the 2021 draft. And so a lot of people opted out of the 2020 season and are returned for the 2021 NCAA season to enter next year's draft. So the talent pool in this draft is expected to be one of the best in the last 10 or 15 years. So that's one of the reasons why I'm really excited for this draft. The Ravens have really stocked up on draft picks. Team needs. Well, Defensive interior is one of them. Like I said, Matabuke, I think, projects as a guy that can play almost every down for us in the future. But Campbell and Wolf and Williams are all over 30. I don't think Williams is on this team for that much longer. I'm not sure how much longer Campbell stays in the league. He is 35. He's playing at a high level, but who knows? He might want to hang it up just after a while. And Derek Wolfe has struggled with a lot of injuries in his career, and so I wouldn't be shocked if he retired within the next few years either. So the Ravens need to get younger on the interior of the defensive line. I also think it would be nice to have a really good pass rusher on that interior, something that they don't have and that I think would help their edge rush a lot more, is having someone blow up the pocket and force quarterbacks to not be able to just step up in the pocket. I'm really happy with how they drafted this past year. So in terms of the rest of the team needs, offensive tackle is the biggest one. Losing Ronnie Stanley, we still don't know if he's going to play football again, and it's tough to say, but there's a very real chance that if his surgery and recovery from that doesn't heal properly, I mean, those are some crucial ligaments just for standing and moving. And at left tackle, with that much weight that you're putting on your ankle, it has to be perfect. And so if Stanley, hopefully he plays again, hopefully he returns to the same level, but the Ravens need to start planning for him not to be. And I'm not sure if Makari projects as a future right tackle for us full time. I think if he can return from the injury and play out the rest of the season, I'm happy to hand him the starting right tackle job going into next season, because he'll have a full off-season training for it. He'll be even more ready for it this season than he was this season. He'll be even more ready for it next season than he was this season. And he wasn't really ready to do that this season. But offensive tackle, whether it's a left tackle or a right tackle, I just want someone younger that projects as a real future at that position. The Ravens are always going to be in the mix for guys on defense, especially in the secondary. Linebacker core is pretty young right now, so I would be surprised if they drafted more than one linebacker. There's always a shot they'll look at one, especially if they don't think Queen is going to be the stud that they thought he was going to be. If they think they need someone different to pair him with instead of Malik Harrison, they may look for that. But they're always going to be looking for your best corners and your safeties, because they're so good at training corners and safeties in Baltimore. I mean, Averett is a guy who barely got any playing time his first few seasons, and he's looked pretty consistent this year just as a result of being part of a really good group.
Well, I mean, you look at the roster, and they're in good position to contend for years to come. I mean, anytime you have a superstar quarterback, like Lamar Jackson, the leader he is, and then Harbaugh, I mean, they're really in good position to do some great things.
Yeah, and that's where those draft picks come in. Lamar's going to get paid. I think he said he's been so focused on this season that he hasn't really focused on his contract right now. He's going to get paid. His cap hit explodes with his fifth-year option next year, and that's where those draft picks come in. You need to hit on young, cheap players that can step in and contribute in a variety of roles, because eventually the guys who you've drafted in recent years, they're going to move on and get bigger contracts that you can't afford at other teams. And so there's two ways to win in the NFL: build around a quarterback on a rookie contract and have a lot of expensive pieces around him. They've been able to do that this season. A lot of injuries have knocked out a lot of that cap room. Or you pay your really good quarterback and you give him all of that money, and you have to surround him with a lot of young talent that you just have to maximize. And so they're going to need to maximize the value of every single last one of those draft picks.
Well, that's paying a quarterback, that is a good place to be, though, if you have one like him. I mean, I'm a Bears fan, and we've been struggling for so long, and that is the key spot just for the whole franchise. But he really he is the face of the franchise.
Mm-hmm. He's a true franchise quarterback, and this is a team that paid Joe Flacco a lot of money when there was a lot of debate about whether or not he deserved it. Looking back, definitely a bloated contract for him. I'll defend him until the day I die for what he's done for this team, but he was not a $120 million quarterback when he signed that contract. He just didn't live up to it. But the Ravens paid it anyway, because they know the importance of this position. And when you have a player like Jackson and you have a chance to lock him up, not just a player, but a person, he means so much to the city of Baltimore now. So much. There's been a lot of great coverage about his impact in the community, how kids just look up to him. Kids want to be wearing that number 8 at school. They want to be Lamar Jackson and the role model that he is for this city. Because it's not just that he's great at football. that parents love the fact that their kids love Lamar Jackson. It's how respectful and professional he is at all times. It's how great of a leader and a role model he is. And you don't get this chance very much. Kansas City knew what they had in Patrick Mahomes, and they locked him up, rightfully so. Expect the Ravens to do the same. I want Lamar Jackson to retire a Raven.
Absolutely. Well, this has been fantastic. I mean, I've learned a ton. I definitely appreciate you coming on. Everyone can find you where again?
Heavy.com is where I do the majority of my work. I also do some blogging for the Russell Street Report. I have a podcast with them that is a Ravens recap podcast called Russell Street Replay. But the majority of my work can be found on Heavy.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Nikhil. I definitely appreciate you coming on. And once again, this has been NFL Outdated Cover 2 series on the Baltimore Ravens, and we'll see how the season goes. It's definitely going to be an exciting one.
Thanks so much for having me.
We'll talk to you soon.